Thank you. I'm going to talk for a few minutes first, and I'll bring the rest of our power panel up here. You know, strategy really gets kind of a bad rap. I think it's something that's really misunderstood. A lot of people think it's complicated, time-consuming. But the reality is that strategy is essential, and it's critical. And because of the time we have today, we're not going to turn this into a, how to write a strategy statement or how to conduct a strategy session. We're going to talk about the real basics of being strategic from a behavioral point of view, an action point of view. What does it mean to be strategic? So my first job here is to show you how to be strategic in terms of giving a presentation. And the first thing is I wrote what I call a destination statement. And that, like a good strategy, is also very simple. And that strategy statement is, at the end of the session, you will see strategy as something as simple, not complex, and leave with real-world examples of how to be strategic. So we'll talk about that at the end and see if we met the destination. So it's about setting expectations. It's about making sure that you have a plan and a way to get to that plan. I think one of the things that confuses people about strategy is where it came from. It derives from a Greek word, strategia, which means the ability to employ available resources to win a military conflict. And it is very closely tied to conflict and in the military. It has a lot of connotations there, and it's about winning. And while we do want to win, strategy should be really more about continuous improvement, sustainability, about making sure that we're doing good all the time. It's not just about winning a battle. It's not about short-term goals. It's behaving in a way that is strategic. So my advice would be to worry less about creating strategies for everything and focus more on being strategic in your approach. Here's one example of what being strategic is, and this is critical. This is a critical one that everyone, if you don't already, you really should employ. And this will tie back in a little bit to some of the stuff that Skip was talking about. Strategic thinkers see questions before answers. Non-strategic thinkers see answers before they know the right questions. It's about doing the research. It's about gaining understanding. It's about having insights to know how to achieve success. So it's about understanding your ecosystem, understanding your exhibitors, your attendees, and what they need to be successful. Even our sub-theme is really a way to be strategic. Aspire, realize, and transform. That's a process. When you put all those things together, you see success, you define success, you realize it by working the plan, and then you transform it from a point of continuous improvement, from evolution. So there's another talk that I give called "You Can't Be Successful Unless You Know What Success Looks Like." And here's a secret of success. And it's not Mickey. It's actually something that you're going to recognize. Skip and I actually share a lexicon. We had a lot of overlap during the IBM days, early IBM days, getting their event marketing strategy, so we have some shared language. So it is the ecosystem. It's making sure that you're taking care of the whole so that you as the organizer can be successful. You can't just look at your own success down a tunnel. You got to look at the whole. If you take and you look at it as a Venn diagram, you see the overlaps that Skip was talking about. Where everything overlaps, those three overlaps, is the value that needs to be created for success to take place. And the very core, that is your picture of success. When everyone succeeds together, then the whole is successful. That's how you reach your maximum success. You also can't be successful unless you know what business you're in. This is the old Harvard B School question from Ted Levitt, who wrote The Marketing Imagination back in the 1980s. Still a book that's really relevant today. He used examples like how the railroad industry lost their way because they thought they were in the railroad business. They weren't in the railroad business, they were in the transportation business. They lost sight of that. It took them a long time to recover to become viable again. So it's really important that we always ask ourselves, what business are we really in? And I would say, I would look at a lot of you and say, you're probably in the value creation business. You're creating value for yourself, you're creating value for your constituents, and they for theirs. That's what success really looks like. One other quick thing before we get to the panel. Because this is the art of strategy, you all have something called a Buddha board. And a Buddha board is this amazing little art easel that you can draw on, and you all have a little bit of water in front of you if you wanted to try it. And you take and you draw, and you can use it for your own little visioning exercises, along with the Play-Doh that you can take along with you. Suzanne Purdy, who helped us with all the event design and put all this together, has a knack for finding these sort of things. A few years ago, actually probably about 6-7 years ago, we helped Richard with one of the early sandboxes, and she came up with the idea of putting together, those little Zen sand gardens. She made a sandbox, just like that we gave away as a gift to everyone, and that was fun. So she's good with that. So, let me introduce our group. You're already a drawing there, aren't you? So Bob Chiricosta is the Director of Marketing and Sales for Mack Brooks Shows. Give Bob a hand. Yeah. Then we have Jeff McQuilkin. You over here, Bob.
You said middle.
Did I?
You did.
Then I'm wrong. My apologies. Jeff McQuilkin is the Director of Sales for Solar Energy Trade Shows. And we have Hunter Clemens, who's the Vice President of Meetings Management Group. So thank you all for taking time to prep and to be here. Now I have to tell you that I'm actually a stand-in. Michael Hart was going to be helping us, or did help us, put the panel together, did a lot of the legwork working with them, but Michael had some foot surgery that turned into something a bit more complex than it was supposed to, so his doctor is not allowing him to be here. So, but he's recovering fine, so I just wanted to just put a thank you out to Michael Hart virtually here. So here's what we're going to do. Each of our bachelors are going to...
Well done.
Each of our bachelors are going to first just do a little brief description on their position and situation, and then they're going to talk a little bit about some examples of how they have had to be strategic and some of the successes they've had from that. So we're going to start with Hunter.
Hi, everybody. I'm happy to be here today. This is an amazing group of people, so thank you for being here. What I want to talk about is, right now I work for Association Management Group, AMG. I run their meetings division, which is Meetings Management Group, and our group does anywhere between 75 and 100 meetings a year. So we see a lot of things come and go and change and transition, and so we're used to a lot of different moving parts and things happening. Are any of you familiar with the term or idea of meeting architecture? Has anybody ever heard of that? Well, there's an author by the name of Martin Van Est, and he's in Europe, actually, and he does a lot of shows in Europe and meetings. But he talks about meeting architecture, and he says that is the key thing to where our industry is going, and that it's almost a different role than the traditional tactical role that meeting professionals and trade show professionals played in the past. And I think this ties exactly to what Richard is talking about, because when you talk about strategy, meeting architecture is all about strategy. Thinking of what you need to do to make something better, basically, or achieve the goal. So as we all know, when we're learning about meetings and events and trade shows, the first question that we get asked is, what are the goals, or the most important question, what are the goals and objectives of the meeting, the event, the trade show, whatever you're doing? And so when you start analyzing things and trying to see what it is you need to do, and that's being strategic, there are many resources at your fingertips. You can, as you see, we can poll the attendees, we can poll the exhibitors, we can do all sorts of things to get the information we need to be strategic. One of the cases that we had at MMG, we had a new client come in, and they had a trade show that was flat. And their exhibitors were starting to dwindle. So we sat down and had a meeting with them, and we talked to their exhibitors, we talked to the attendees, we did some surveys, and basically what we found out was it was a very unlively hall, and they kept it open all day. So what we started doing is what a lot of people would do at trade shows. We created more reasons to go in there. We designed what they called a central stage, which was very, it brought a lot of life into the hall. It made things happen. They did lunches in there, and you had to, even though it was pharmaceutical companies, they were coming in, you couldn't get the CMEs, but they would do product demo lunches. And it was, the storm to get in there to be at this lunch. Everybody, it was a ticketed event, and people were lining up. It was, all of a sudden there was a lot of life in the hall. They did product demos in there that they hadn't done before. So basically, we sat down and figured out all the things we needed to do to make that show more successful. And what happened is attendees were happier, the exhibitors certainly were happier, and the show has continued to grow. So that's one of the things we did in a real life situation with a client. Another one that we had, their whole purpose of their event was more of a appointment setting event where they scheduled set times to meet with people and do business. They actually do business. And what they had done in the past was they had set up tabletops outside the appointment area for the sponsors of the event, basically. And that what would happen is these sponsors would put little tchotchkes on the table, but they wouldn't really work them, and they wouldn't. So we sat down with them, and it didn't have any life. And we found out from that organization when we were talking to them, and really it's all about communication. What is it that they're looking for? Well, we thought the first year that we worked with them that they wanted to make a profit. So we were saying, okay, here's how you do this. We cut everything, we made everything, made them a great profit, probably one of the best profits they've ever had. But at the end of the day, their attendees were not happy. And so we had to sit down and regroup and re-look at that whole formula of what we were doing. And one of the things we did, the appointment booths were integral into what they do. And so what we did was we created basically a trade show area with actual booths adjacent to and part of the appointment setting area, because what we found is there were a lot of opportunities in between appointments where people could go and sit and talk to a sponsor. Well, that whole creation, being strategic and figuring that out, has made that total show incredible. And happy sponsors, happy attendees, and that's what it's all about at the end of the day. So when I talk about being strategic, you really do have to look at what is going on and how can you make it better and make sure that your solution is going to work in the end.
Cool. Thank you very much, Hunter. Bob?
Hi, everyone. I'm going to be talking about launch shows. And strategy is never more important than when you're thinking about or planning a launch show. There's kind of two types of launch shows. There's a greenfield, or a totally new concept. Something hasn't been done before, and something hasn't been done in your neck of the woods, wherever, whatever, be that a state, an area, city, or country. And there's a geo-clone. You got a show that maybe you own or are running in Europe, and you decide you want to bring it to the United States. Or you have one in the United States, and you decide I want to bring a very similar show and run it in China. And it could be one you own, it could be just one that you really admire. Someone else is running somewhere else. You might want to run a similar show here because there isn't one. A lot depends upon if you own a brand somewhere else, is that brand known in the new location that you're going to put the show? In other words, if you have a show in Europe and it's got a great name there, but nobody in the United States has ever heard of it, that's not going to help you much over here. So it's almost the same as a totally new concept. If the branding is really key. Early on, in the earliest strategy, you got to think through all the pitfalls. You know, is the show viable at all? You got to research the concept. And the key thing here is who are the buyers and who are the sellers. So that's motherhood apple pie. You know, we're bringing buyers and sellers together, but they got to be the buyers that want to buy from those sellers. I've seen an unbelievable startup of a great show, total failure. The visitors came, went to the conferences, and said this is the best event they'd ever been to. All kinds of exhibitors were there, big names, Hewlett-Packard and other big names and all that. But the visitors who came weren't buyers for those exhibitors. It was sort of, the visitors came for the conferences and those things, but it wasn't a match to the exhibitors. And the show was a total failure. The exhibitors thought it was horrible. Visitors said, greatest thing they ever attended. Yeah, there were some exhibits over there. They didn't go over to see them. They spent all their time in the conferences. So that's really important to get that match of buyers and sellers. If you don't have that, there's no show. Other things you have to think about, are you going to have an association partner? That's great for bringing in visitors. Do you have a conference component to the show? If it's a geo-clone, will the exhibitors from the show in Europe say, come to the United States and exhibit here? Will the visitors that attended the show there come here? Probably not. You probably get exhibitors wanting to expose their products to a new country or a new area. You probably won't get visitors if there's a show there. They're not going to come here to see a show. You have to think about the time of the year. You have to think about the location. The time of the year conflicts. If you're running a show for ping pong tables and you want to have it in the spring, but it turns out China's running the Worldwide Ping Pong Confederation show in the spring, you're not going to get anybody. The big exhibitors are going to be there. So even if it's the other side of the world, timing is everything for a launch show because you're not known. So timing is really, really critical. And then the destination. Or is it a destination location or is it close to the visitors? And there's an awful lot to that. It kind of depends if you're looking for the boss or the buyer. Let me give you a good example. If you had a show for the paper industry, if you wanted these big exhibitors that are selling machinery for the paper industry, winders and unwinds and ovens and big machinery, the people who buy the big machinery are very high level. They're investing millions of dollars in this equipment. You're going to want vice presidents and people like that. You may have some other exhibitors that sell maybe a roller or maybe bearings for the roller. Low-end things, something that a plant manager would buy or something that a maintenance guy would buy in the factory. If you want to attract those kinds of people, the lower-end buyers, you've got to be near the factories. So you're going to hold that paper show in Maine or in Southeast or Wisconsin or someplace. But if you want the VPs to come, if you want the presidents, you want the owners of the company making million-dollar decisions and purchasing decisions, then you might want to be in a destination location, a Las Vegas or an Orlando. So you got to match who you want to come with the exhibitors you hope to get, and the location fits in with all of that. So it's a matrix that you have to really think through, and that's all the strategy on this launch show, because you only get one launch. You know, it's hard to launch a second time. Lists of potential visitors. How are you going to get that list? How are you going to put together the people to market to? Associations help. There's all sorts of ways to get lists. But you got to understand where you're going to get that from. And my thing is, I always feel that whether you're trying to get an exhibitor to exhibit at your show or a visitor to come to your show, you have to touch them 3 times. Whether it's an ad one time, a phone call one time, a visit at another trade show, or direct mail, email marketing. He needs to, on a new show, he's got to hear it from 3 different people, 3 different ways before he even thinks it's legit. You know, one ad one time, that's not going to make a guy sign up or even go to visit the show. He's got to hear it from somebody. He's got to get a phone call about it. He's got to get a direct mail piece. He needs to feel that this is important to him. And once isn't going to do it. Then you have to pick your vendors. Now, you're all here, so you already made the good choice of picking Shepard. But you know, you have registration companies and AV and electrical catering, freight. Freight forwarding can be critical on geocloning because you've got exhibitors that are exhibiting at a show somewhere else in the world, and you want them now to bring their equipment, display materials, whatever, to the United States. So picking that freight forwarder that's friendly to the country you're coming from is a critical thing. So that's a little different than usually. Usually they're not as critical to, choice. And then are you going to have a steering committee or an advisory? I'd rather call them advisory boards. And I've found that you don't want it to be your top 10 biggest exhibitors because they're all very similar in who they want to attract and what they're, one might be selling one piece of the, say it's a paper mill, one piece of the paper line, the machine, another piece of the paper machine, but they're all selling the big things. You may want to have somebody that sells supplies that need to get replenished all the time, and somebody that sells big stuff, and somebody that sells rollers, or different areas that you might services, things like that. So get a distribution. You have to listen to what they say. It's really, really important. But avoid the personal agendas. There's always going to be somebody that is hung up about something about trade shows. Let them talk, and make note of it. But don't follow one guy all the way down a road over here if everyone else is being quiet. You got to listen. Don't let them make decisions. Don't let them vote. Okay. If you want them to vote on something, have them vote on show hours or something like that. Something that really isn't important, but get their input. But don't let them decide because you never know what they're going to decide. And set term limits on anybody on your steering committee because they get into it, but then you need some fresh information and you don't want to kick somebody off. So right from the beginning, if they know they're going to be here for 3 years and then they're off the committee, that's fine. 3 years is up, you get somebody else. You bring them back a year later if you want, if they were really good. But always set a term limit. Just quickly, the budget. You have to put together your budget, obviously, and the first thing is the price of the space. Price is not going to determine how many exhibitors you get. If they think the show is worthwhile, they're going to come and exhibit. If the price 20% up or 20% down isn't going to change who exhibits in the show. It might change the size of their booth, for sure. But if they think the show's worthwhile, they're going to come. Are you going to charge admission to the show? Are you going to charge admission ahead of time or free ahead of time? You're going to let exhibitors give it out free? All of that, you got to think about what you're going to get in. Do not expect sponsorships on a startup show. Everybody involved is taking a chance. The exhibitors are taking a chance on a brand new show they never heard of before. They're going to invest money in a booth. I don't think they're going to spend more money to do a whole bunch of sponsorships. They just want to see if the show even attracts anybody. Visitors are taking a chance. They're going to fly someplace or go someplace, get a hotel room, go into the show, and don't know what to expect either. So sponsorships, don't budget a lot of sponsorships on a startup because that's probably not going to happen. And you have to think about how you're going to reach the visitors. Some shows, social media is everything. And it depends on the industry and the people in the industry and the age of the industry. Some shows, social media just doesn't work. They're just not in tune with it. And you'd be surprised which ones it works on and which ones it doesn't. I've been very surprised at a new show we're starting. It's nothing but social media, and you would never guess in a million years that they were into social media. Conferences are great because they help justify the visitor to come to the show. So if you have a conference a guy goes, well, let me give you a story. It goes back to destinations again, too. if you have a show in a destination location, and I said you get a higher level of vice president and all, I've seen this happen, I've heard this happen. A guy goes to his boss and he says, hey, there's this trade show taking place and we're going to be buying this piece of equipment, and look, there's 5 vendors of this piece of equipment going to be at the show, and they have a conference, and at the conference, one of our competitors is speaking. And the guy says, I think I should go to that show. Now that conference was probably going to get the guy to go to the show. But they're going to buy a big piece of equipment. And the boss looks at this and says, oh, it's in Las Vegas. I think I better go to this show. And that's what happens. You get the higher level person at a destination place than you might in a show if you held it in Wisconsin for the paper industry. And then just other ways to reach visitors, you know, you got to think about, are you going to do something like a golf tournament? You're going to have a great keynote speaker, the destination, things like that. Just the key points that I wanted to just mention one more time. Make sure your buyers and sellers match each other. Do you how to reach each of them? Can you identify them? When and where are you going to put the show? And time is critical. You can't launch a show. You can't say today, in 9 months, I'm going to launch a brand new show and everything. You need time. You need 2 years, but 1.5 years maybe in the right industry, you might get away with that, but time is really critical. That's it. I'm done.
Great. Thank you, Bob. Before we go on with Jeff, I want to ask you all something. Both Hunter and Bob made me think of a couple of things. You know, once you have a strategy and you have a plan to get to your vision, you know, how do you socialize it? How do you get people wrapped around it? How do you keep things on track? I know keeping things on track is difficult because someone always has a new idea and something. And I had a great mentor at Coca-Cola who said strategy is both a shield and a sword. They use the shield to fend off the ideas that don't fit strategy and use the sword to fight for the ones that do fit. So just, you know, as a leader, how do you make that happen?
One of the key things that we do, you know, when we have a new strategy and we're working on something to solve an issue or come up with a new way to do something, A, we talk about it in meetings, but B, one of the key things that you have to do, it takes a village basically to put on a trade show, a meeting, or an event. And so what we do is we reach out to our partners, our vendors, to help us realize this vision. We get them on board with us and we say, we're trying to do this. What do you know about it? How can you contribute? How can you help us make this a win-win for everybody? And I think that's a really good way to do it, by enlisting the support of all the players that are going to put on that event and make it happen.
So being an evangelist.
Right.
I would say actually the same thing, and constant communication. Constant bringing it back in, just constantly bringing it back in and eye on the prize.
Yeah. Right. Jeff, how would you answer that?
In my situation, I think we're lucky. Our solar energy trade shows is owned by 2 solar associations. So we've got a tremendous amount of industry knowledge and a tremendous amount of industry connections. And when we're initiating new strategies, we use that knowledge and those connections to help keep us on track, to help us cut through and figure out what's really important. And that helps to get everybody to buy in and kind of helps to make a self-sustaining path to execute that strategy.
Okay, cool. I'm gonna let you go on then with your.
Okay, well, a quick background. Like I said, Solar Energy Trade Shows is owned by 2 solar associations, and before I was with Solar Energy Trade Shows, I was with Nielsen Expositions. I was a show director with them for about 14 years. They're now Emerald Expositions, and I think along with Reed, they're probably one of the largest for-profit trade show organizers in the country. And I bring that up because when Michael called me to ask me to be on the panel, I said no. I said no way, because I can talk about strategy, I think, but I'm like, I don't know. Do I want to be on a panel? And he said, well, what I'd like you to discuss is how you approach your strategy differently, being in a for-profit environment versus a nonprofit or an association environment. I said, okay, I can probably do that. So I'm just going to touch on a couple things, sort of how we approach things differently in one environment versus the other. First of all, with Nielsen, with for-profit, At least in my experience, it's important to remember for-profit trade show companies exist not to produce trade shows, but to make money. That's why they are in business. That's why I had a job. That's why everybody in my company had a job. And I bring that up, I'm not knocking it, it's fine, we all realize that. But that fact drove pretty much every decision we made, every strategic decision, every business decision, every marketing decision was based on, is this going to help us help feed our bottom line? From little things to expenses on the trade show floor, to starting to get into some bigger decisions about how we allocated human resources. Things like our marketing plans. We actually were fortunate at Nielsen, it's a big company. They were able to invest in software and analytics to help us really dig down deep into our marketing plan and get a really good idea of the return on investment on each and every one of our marketing campaigns. So with that kind of analysis, the following year, we were able to make some really well-educated strategic decisions when we were putting together our marketing plan, and we knew that we were spending our money wisely, and that, again, that would help feed the bottom line at the end of the day. Similarly, just as a quick aside, one good practice I think that came out of that atmosphere was we would zero out our budget every year. We wouldn't just add 3% to the previous year's budget and figure, well, that'll probably end up being about right. We started with 0, and that forces you to look at each and every single expense in your budget and decide, is this really money well spent? Do we need to maybe add more? Do we need to cut less or add less? That was painful sometimes, discouraging sometimes, but a really valuable lesson. In my opinion now, in the nonprofit world with solar energy, the approach is a little bit different. Obviously, budgets are of a high concern, and I think at the end of the day, we give them every bit the scrutiny that we did in the for-profit world. But the sort of the strategy and the approach to our expenses, to me, is a little different. Now it's more our expenses are in place in order to create this memorable and valuable experience for our membership and our attendees. It's almost like we treat them as an investment rather than a necessary evil. When we look at each expense, we'll say, okay, is this really adding something to the show? If it is, maybe can we do it a little bit better? If not, we don't necessarily cut it out. We might say, okay, can we spend this money a little bit wiser, maybe in doing something else, again, to try to create, it's all about creating this memorable experience for our members and for our attendees, rather than just trying to get to a certain number that has been dictated because of the profit margin that's required in order to satisfy either our shareholders or our private equity holders when it was in the for-profit sector. Show growth strategies are a little bit different, I think, from for-profit to nonprofit. At Nielsen, we were pretty nimble, pretty quick. We had a lot of resources at our disposal. As they were mentioning in the lunch presentation today, willing to take a few risks with Nielsen in the for-profit industry. If you had a good game plan, a good business plan, and a good idea, you could get a green light pretty quickly. You could get that up and not the show up and running, but start your process within a couple days. And if it was a larger event idea, it would still be a little while, but you would be up and running pretty quick. They were fine with it if you failed, as long as you tried as hard as you could, and they were not hesitant to pull the plug after a year if it didn't work either. So, but it was always an atmosphere of encouragement, even really requirement at my level, at the director level, to look for organic ideas, whether it would be just adding pavilions to existing events or launching new events. In my current role with solar energy trade shows, I think I'm lucky. I think we're pretty nimble and quick to react to, at least with respect to smaller scale ideas, again, pavilions or maybe small regional shows or shows that are addressing maybe kind of a new hot vertical market segment. But we're not geared up to launch moderate or major events anywhere near as quickly as we could with the resources of a for-profit sector. And that's just, so we adjust our medium and long-term strategies accordingly. The major or more moderate launches are part of those rather than near-term strategies. That's kind of a shame in a way, because a lot of times the first one into the market has the advantage. but that's just sort of the nature of the environment in which we live, and that's okay. The last thing I just wanted to address is membership and education, and how our strategies with respect to those two things were different from one to the other. With Nielsen, it's a for-profit show. There really was no membership. I mean, we like to treat our customers as members of a valuable community, but at the end of the day, there was no organization of customers. They had no authority. They could speak with their dollars, where they would spend them or not spend them, but other than that, it wasn't an organized group with influence. I learned a lot of lessons at Nielsen that have proved very valuable, and I think in the long run, I'm glad I went from for-profit to non-profit, but I will say I was unprepared and sort of totally underestimated the impact that membership has on almost everything that we do in the Solar Energy Association world. Whether it's from planning for the membership experience on the show floor, or to making sure our parent associations have prominent and well-designed booths on the show floor so that they look good for their members. It's pervasive in a lot of the things we do, and it also includes actually a board of governors made up of members that selects our locations for better or for worse. We have influence, but the ultimate decision is made by our membership base. Education and seminars too. We had great education offerings when I was in the for-profit world. I was in the photography group at Nielsen, and we had great educational offerings. But when we put that program together, it was under the microscope of this is a profit sector for the entire event. And every speaker choice, the pricing, the subject matter was all chosen based on, will this be a profitable venture for us? I think with the association world now, we also have excellent education, and it's on a little bit more equal footing, I think. It's all part of this, creating this memorable and valuable experience for our attendees and making our parent associations look good and look like the thought leaders in the industry that they are. Being the trade show floor sales director, got some mixed feelings about that, but I understand why it's in place. But it does affect the way we approach our education.
Thank you. I want to put you guys on the spot for just a second, just because I'm curious. The Harvard B School question, what business are you really in? How would you each answer that question?
I'm in the business of creating a marketplace for buyers and sellers.
Cool.
It's almost a two-thing for me. We're in the business of bringing together buyers and sellers for sure. That's what we do, is create opportunities for buyers and sellers to come together. But in each of the areas where we run trade shows, we feel part of that industry. And we are attached to that part of the industry, even though we're a for-profit, privately held company. We really tie ourselves to the industries. That we only do shows in about 10 industries, and in those industries we have people who know and understand them.
Okay, cool. Hunter?
I would have to say we are in the business that creates an experience.
Experience business.
And that experience allows you to sell or not sell or do whatever you want to do with that event. One thing that it was interesting listening to Jeff. One thing that I go in front of boards of directors all the time, I have to talk to them about meetings and profitability in meetings. And one of the things I often end up having to tell a board of directors is, especially of a nonprofit association, just because you're a nonprofit organization does not mean that you need to be profitable. In other words, many of these meetings and events and things that we do allow the organizations to do what they do for their members. It's what we do that creates the revenue for them. So a lot of times you do have to make decisions in the nonprofit world that are very similar, like you said, to what you do in the for-profit world.
I'd like to open up that question to the rest of the audience. Anybody have an interesting answer for what business are you really in? Just go ahead and shout it out. No?
Entertainment.
Entertainment?
The media, we provide a platform.
What was that, Rainier?
We provide a platform where voice hasn't existed before.
Yeah, I don't think we heard that, Rainier. I'm sorry.
He said that he created a platform for a voice that never existed before.
That's cool. That's a good one. I was hoping we'd hear from the Vape Summit guys on that question. Anybody have any questions for Bob, Jeff, or Hunter? Down in front, I knew it was going to be far away. I'm getting my steps today.
It's late in the day.
That's all right, I need the exercise. Thank you, Anna.
So I believe it was Bob.
Uh-oh.
You were talking. You were talking about all the things that affect when you're starting a new show. Do you have any tips you can share with us when the political agenda of an association on Capitol Hill is affecting your exhibitors?
Well, yeah. How much time do we have? The number one thing is something that's been talked about over and over and over again, is making it easier for people, exhibitors and visitors that want to come from Brazil and China to get into the United States. That process has to be made simpler because it limits many of our shows. If a guy is in Brazil and he's going to want to exhibit, and he's a big manufacturer of something or other, and he wants to exhibit at a trade show, and he has a choice of one in the US or one in Germany, he's going to go to the one in Germany because he can just go there. He doesn't need to go have an interview and go through a whole big process to get a visa that he would to come here. So from a political standpoint, that's something we need to have changed. I'm the 200th person probably today to say something like that. I mean, it's very common, everybody knows this is an issue, but to me, that's the thing we need them to change. Is that where you were going with this kind of a thing? Or?
No, but I appreciate that. I meant internally within the United States, where associations have public relations departments, and they're always lobbying on Capitol Hill to be able to get their agenda or a bill change or reimbursements changed for physicians or physician assistants or whatever they might be. And industry may not agree with how the association is lobbying. In fact, they don't want them to go in that particular direction, to the point where they may boycott your show. So from a strategic standpoint, do you have any tips on how you could kind of diffuse and bring the group together to where they could help each other in that situation?
Bob, can you encapsulate the last part of that question so everyone can hear?
Sometimes an association for the greater good has certain positions that they will lobby government, local, city, state, federal governments for certain positions. And it may be different than what individual companies, exhibitors want the way things to be. I kind of got that? Yeah. And
It affects their business differently than the attendees.
yeah, than the association. No, I don't have an answer for you. I don't.
No, I can maybe say one thing real quick about that. In our world, in the solar energy world, there's two kind of political footballs out there right now, real quick, without getting too geeky. One is with respect to tariffs on imported Chinese manufactured goods, and another has to do with investment tax credits on if you install solar paneling in your home or your business, and they're both very contentious issues. And a lot of one of our parent associations has actually lobbied for one way on the tariff issue, and that has ticked off some people on the Chinese imports. But they're obviously arguing to keep the investment tax credit, and that is pretty much universally applauded, at least here within the United States. So in our case, if we do get some heat sometime, if people don't agree with the position they're taking on the one, but we'll try to point out, well, look, we are lobbying the money that, by the way, the profits from this show that that we're putting on, which go to support this association, we are doing these other things that we know can help your business. So it's not going to be 100% agreeable for you, but we've got these other aspects that they're lobbying hard for that we know can help you. And we also, by the way, try to use that as an advantage against our competitor. The one other competing solar show is a for-profit show organized by a German Messe, and the profits from there go right back to the parent company in Germany. And we actually try to use that, and we've tried to come up with some strategies to influence people to do our show where the profits go back into the industry versus the competing one. To be honest with you, we've had moderate success. I'm surprised that it doesn't really seem to resonate with our customers as much as I thought it might, but we'll keep trying.
It's Richard Maples over
Yes,
here
sir,
from
I
Shepard.
recognize
I'd like
you.
to ask a question. Actually, I'd like the three of you maybe just to address shortly kind of the difference between goal setting and strategy. A lot of times I sit and talk to customers and ask what their 3 to 5 year strategy is, and the answer is grow attendance, which is not a strategy, it's just a goal. So how far out are you guys on specific events writing a strategy and a bit long-range strategic plan, and then the difference between the goals and a strategy?
Oh, let me go. I'll take a shot at it. As I mentioned before, we run trade shows, a lot of shows, but in just certain industries, and the strategies are industry-based. Where is that industry going to be going in 3, 4, 5, 10 years? What is it going to look like? And are we incorporating those areas in our show so that we can grow with the industry and change with the industry? So from the strategy standpoint, it's sort of industry-based, not marketing or anything like that. It's not growth. We want to grow the shows, of course. We don't want them to get smaller, but we want to go in the same direction that we think each industry is going, I guess.
And just to echo what Bob said, we do a lot of different meetings in a lot of different industries. So obviously, there, like you said, Richard, there are goals, but you do have to have a strategy. And with each industry, you're going to look at what's going on in that arena and develop your strategy to go along with it. The other thing you have to look at is what are the demographics of the organization or the industry doing? Is it going up? Is it going down? Some industries are dwindling and dying. And that might mean you have a strategy that has an exit to it. So yes, you have to really look at it very carefully and weigh out where the long-term vision is going to be with this organization. And understand that every year you need to revisit it to see if you're still on track. It's not one of those things where you write a strategy and then put it on a shelf. You actually have to focus on it and look at it all the time to make sure you're in the right direction and that you don't need to make a course correction.
I would say if your goal is to score a touchdown, your strategy is the plays that you're going to run to get there. And I forgive the tired sports analogy, but it's kind of appropriate because the plays, you can't just call the same plays every time. You've got to look at your surroundings. What's your competition? What are your resources? What's the weather? What kind of conditions are you in that's going to help you get there? And you can't just rinse and repeat every time. You've got to take all of that into account.
Yeah, it's a great metaphor. Thank you, Jeff. And Richard, thanks. That was a really good question. Gentleman on your left, Margaret Core from FMI.
Hi. My question maybe is for Jeff, but the others, Hunter and Bob, might have comments too. So those of us who come from an association side, Jeff, since you've worked on the for-profit and the association side, oftentimes we find ourselves strategically, it might make sense to do a partnership together, and one is an association and one is for-profit. Do you have any advice on how to get to the same bed, same dream?
Yeah, if it's going to be worth their while for the for-profit side, I probably am making it sound more laser focused on profit than at least my experience truly was. But at the end of the day, that's if you're looking to profit with the for-profit businesses will have, I think, resources that can help you that might not otherwise be available to an association on a small or medium scale. Certainly, maybe the larger ones, yes. So from there, it's a matter of a business proposal. I think if it's worth it, I think they'd be happy to partner with an association. And we actually looked for opportunities like that when I was on the for-profit side, especially with respect to our launches, because we needed some sort of, if they were in a new field, we needed some sort of legitimizing partnership, or be it a magazine or association or something like that, to help us get to where we wanted to go with respect to the new launch.
A halo.
Yeah, exactly.
I'll give you my business card. And we do it all the time. We very often own the show, work with an association very closely. They kind of feel it's their show, and they make a significant amount of money out of the show. And they support us, we support them, it works together. I know one association tells me all the time they see it as a three-legged stool. They have the association, they have a magazine, and they need a show. Yeah. And we're the show part for them. And they do well, and we do well. It's a great relationship. And we do that often.
I don't want it to appear in the press that I thought we wanted to sell our show.
No.
Rachel, you can.
No, we do.
I'm
We
talking,
work with
I'm talking
associations.
projects, so yeah. tweet.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I'm talking projects that it just seems like every time I talk to a publisher about an idea, and it's all great until we talk about what the split's going to be. Yeah. And to me, if the partner does all the work, then the split should be reflective of that. But if there's mutual brand equity and sweat equity involved, it just seems like they always want the bigger piece of the percentage of the potential profit, and that just bugs the heck out of me.
We're going off track here, but it's a profit and risk thing. It's how much each person has at risk in the involvement, and then that same percentage should be reflective in the profit they make from it.
And what I will say to that, from my perspective, our company, Association Management Group is a corporation. So we partner with organizations to run them for them. So I guess we already do that, sort of.
Thank you.
I have a question. Where does strategy come from?
From the military term.
How do you
Strategia.
Has to do with conflict.
How do you, what, I know this is a really broad question, but I'm curious, how do you in your organization sit down and say, we're going to build a strategy? What does that look like?
Well, for us, it's just what you said. A group of people sit down, say, where are we? Where do we want to be? How are we going to get from A to B? And looking at, the broad picture of everything involved.
And how inclusive or exclusive is that team?
In our case, it's very inclusive. Like I said before, I think we try to take advantage of every resource we have, whether it's industry knowledge, whether it's trade show knowledge, operational knowledge from Michael, every resource that we have that could shed some light on what some potential pitfalls or obstacles might be, or some suggestions of how to get there quicker, faster, cheaper, we'll happily take advantage of it.
In our case, the team is small, but the resources are the pre and post-show surveys and our steering committee. So we pull in information from all of these areas, but the team that makes those kinds of decisions is like 5 or 6 people.
And in our realm, each organization, we have to do it with the leadership of the organization in combination with the leadership at AMG and MMG to create the strategies. So that we have to make sure that we're doing what's in the best interest of the organization, so we must include them in that strategy process.
And then is it published? Is it socialized? Is it?
A lot of times it can end up being a part of their mission statement, or it could be a part of their strategic plan. A lot of times we'll sit down and create a strategic plan for the organization for 3 to 5 years out, just as Richard's talking about. And in that, they focus on what is the most important things, and we try to get them to really narrow it down so that they don't overextend what they're going to do, and that they can live by the strategy. And then that strategic plan that we put together with them, it becomes the foundation for their budget to build all the things that they do, whether it's a meeting, an event, or lobbying on the Hill, or whatever thing they may be wanting to accomplish.
It struck me when you were describing, Jeff, strategy has this reputation as being, very staid and straight and serious. But the way you described it was very much like a good creative process. It's about bringing together, diverse points of view and letting that dynamic really work. So it's more like purposeful creative.
It is creative. It's not always a democracy, but but yeah, it is creative.
Anybody else have any questions? I know it's late and we're talking about strategy.
Well, I can ask questions all day. I love this stuff. So this maybe, help me from what you guys do a little bit here is, from our standpoint, when we go in and try to sit and talk with customers, we have to be careful about trying to push too much, because then it seems like maybe we're overstepping our boundaries. But the customer partners who are more open, we can do this with, but it gets back into the whys when they're asking about doing something. So I want you to talk a little bit about that, about what processes your organizations go through of the whys. So somebody comes in and they decide they want to build a specific area on the floor, and you ask why. Well, typically it goes right back to building booth traffic, but why? And I mean, all the way down to, does that map, how does that map back to your overall strategy and where you're spending your money and resources? I've worked with a client of ours that we've had for years, not here, by the way. Their strategy is to change carpet colors, and they really think that that's a strategy. And and when I try to push them on what they're trying to accomplish by changing the carpet colors and drape colors, and there's no map to a strategy. So I'm interested from you how that decision process maps those strategies back to a long-term goal.
In our case, I think it kind of goes back to, I think when you said, what business are you in? And I said, well, I'm there to create a marketplace. So I'm trying to still create at least part of my show floor to be an attractive marketplace for people that are interested in all kinds of different things that have to do with solar energy. And they could be the sort of related vertical markets as well. So if I'm going to say why, the answer is, if I'm going to ask myself why, I'm going to say, well, is there a demand for this kind of content in this marketplace that we're putting together, and is this going to help us grow our show floor, bring more attendees, bring more exhibitors? It sounds kind of simplistic, but at the end of the day, that's kind of how we approach it, I think.
Yeah, we're pretty much exactly the same. The two driving forces, I guess, for everybody is more exhibit space sales and more visitors. And more visitors for Mack Brooks is always the #1 thing we look for, is to grow the show and visitors. So we'll put something on the show floor if we think that will attract more visitors coming in. So carpet color, that's not one of them. So we wouldn't be concerned about that.
And yeah, as I said earlier, it does tie back to going through and making sure that whatever you're doing ties to, if it's going to cost money, for example, well, what's the return on the investment if you're going to spend that money, and is that investment tied to what our strategy is here. And if it is, then you do it. And if it isn't, then you say, well, we either need to redo our strategy if we want to do this, which I don't recommend, or table it for the next year as we're setting the strategy for the following year.
One of the things that that I always get concerned about when working with clients is that they kind of get stuck in the tactical trap of let's just come up with, let's just put Band-Aids on things. And you wind up with this patchwork quilt of an event that has got, they may have all been really great ideas, but on their own. But when you layer them all on top of each other, it just becomes this mess. But in that spirit, what are the big great ideas that you see out there? What have you seen where someone's really taken it from an agnostic approach, where they're willing to just throw away the old, bring in something really new, radical, different?
One thing that caught my ear, what Skip was talking about earlier, I mean, you guys are probably seeing this too. We're getting calls all the time. I don't want a booth, I don't want a booth. So what kind of strategies can we put in place to keep our customers engaged, keep them at this marketplace contributing to it, but not, I guess, if they don't want to be saddled with the expense of the booth. And when Skip was talking about customer centers, things like that, I think, are things that we're going to have to take a serious look at, how to keep these guys engaged in other ways other than a traditional booth without sacrificing the vitality of a trade show floor.
This just came up the other day, but we have a company, a very large company in the US that sends a whole lot of visitors to one of our shows. And they're spread all over the country, and none of them know that the others are coming. So they figured out, hey, there's a lot of us here. And they wouldn't do a booth, but they would be interested in possibly doing a lounge on the show floor for their employees, and a place for employees to bring guests, visitors, to have little conferences and things like that. So it would be a branded lounge for visitors for a particular company. And if they're bringing, I don't know how many, quite a few, but certainly our #1 company visitor, we were thinking about it. So that's sort of a different way of looking at something.
Okay. Hunter, you have anything?
What we're seeing and have toyed with in certain cases is this whole concept of a hosted buyer, where traditionally they didn't have that, and now they're looking at it, and some people are afraid to make that move because it throws the expense more onto, I think, your exhibitors, your vendors, your sponsors. However, for whatever reason, in certain cases, it has shown to improve the traffic and the results for the exhibitors. So that's one where I've seen that really work.
We had, Nielsen used that model in one of their high-end jewelry shows, and I think that was the most successful one that it worked. It was actually in the very high-end buyer and high price tag exhibitor model, more so than the lower level. It worked quite well for the high-end stuff.
We've done a short analysis, doesn't take much. If you were to ask your exhibitors, your most important exhibitors, your biggest exhibitors, whatever that is, who are their dream visitors? Who is the guy they just would love to have walk in their booth one day? And you get this list of people together, and you were to create a hosted buyer program and invite them to the show and pay for them to come in. That costs less per visitor than your typical marketing, advertising, promotional program. It's a very low-cost way of bringing in visitors, the right visitors. But you got to get that list of the right guys.
Ladies first, and I'll be back while you run.
Hi, I have a question about what you were just talking about. This is something that we're struggling with, is some of our larger exhibitors who are thinking of downsizing or not having a booth at all, but still want to have a presence at the show. And as a membership association, we have in the past, and I guess technically right now, have pretty strict rules about if you don't exhibit, you can't sponsor, for example, because we're trying to encourage the total package and the whole support of the organization. But we don't want to lose them. I don't know if any of you have had any experience for how to, it's a very fine line to walk. If you have any suggestions as to how to navigate that.
We don't allow sponsorship, like you, we don't allow sponsorships unless you're in the show and have a booth in the show.
We're the same, but we're bending the rules sometimes, quite frankly. I mean,
how did you decide to do that? I mean, that's really where we are. We're at a kind of a crossroads, and when I say we, my director and myself, we're a two-person department, and we need to make a decision about what our preferred strategy is, and then try to convince the administration that it's a valid approach. And we're still, like, literally we spend a few hours a week sitting behind a closed door batting this around. What's the best way to approach it?
I gave you our policy, but we would bend the rules for the right amount of money. You know? And we've talked about how we would do that. We haven't done it, but we've talked about how we would do it. And we would allow certain sponsorships, whether it be window clings in a certain area or something, for non-exhibitors. Maybe the sponsorships would not be on the show floor. Maybe they would be in the lobby or something like that. We would have some sort of, we're just kicking it around, but that was an idea we had.
Some plausible deniability about why they're doing it.
Yeah, we're just kicking it around. We haven't tried it, and we haven't approved it or anything, but that's an idea we're kicking around.
We've bent the rules for prominent, again, it goes back to the membership, the importance of membership for prominent members, and to a large degree, we were prepared to take the heat. If somebody wanted to call us on it, we would say we bent the rules for them, and they're a prominent member, and they're an important contributor to this community and to the association, and we wanted to try to save our relationship with them and to make it work. And if we really felt that we needed to make sure they had a booth on the floor, we'd set up a 10 by 10 charging station with their name on it. Boom, there's your booth.
Thank you.
Thank you, Melina. Ron, coming your way.
Thanks. You talked about communicating the strategy to exhibitor boards and staff people. How important is it to include it as part of your marketing? Like using the strategy as a marketing campaign almost to exhibitors and or attendees?
That's
Thanks.
I guess the answer is it's very important, and sitting here thinking we probably don't do that very well, to be honest with you.
Depends what voice you use it, but to Hunter's point, it's all about communications at the end of the day.
But you're saying more so than just, hey, time to book your booth again, Mr. Customer. It's more.
Yeah, no, I'm telling the exhibitor this is the direction we're going and why we're going that direction,
and we need you to be a part of it.
Yeah.
And here's your role in it.
Again, our steering committee is well aware of our direction and everything else. So there's 10 to 12 exhibitors who understand and are with us in the whole process. Beyond that, if it comes up in a conversation with an exhibitor, it comes up, but we don't have a structure for it.
So would you advocate for it or say that's just kind of a behind the scenes kind of thing?
I would advocate for it in the making sure that you communicate it in a way to show the benefit to the exhibitor. In other words, you may have a strategy written slightly differently, but you want to slant it so that they see that it's written for them.
Gotcha.
Can I maybe add too that it's probably important to do it year round rather than just when it's time to rebook, so they feel that they're engaged and partners and a member of the community, and not just we're teeing you up for the shark frenzy of rebooking time. So.
Can I ask a question to everyone? How many of you do something like one morning before the show opens have a exhibitor meeting and invite all exhibitors to sit down and ask you questions?
We do that.
We do that.
Okay, so quite a few of you do. All right, that's another way to do that, and we're thinking strongly about having that this time. So we haven't done it in the past.
Give them breakfast.
Give them breakfast? Yeah. Our exhibitors are treated well.
Yeah.
I meant for that meeting.
Yeah, well, they get all kinds of stuff all the time. They get ice cream. No, we do. We all our exhibitors get ice cream Sundays in the afternoon, and we do all kinds of stuff for them.
Anybody from the audience have anything they'd like to share? Simple strategies in action that yielded great results? Any examples? No takers? Any other questions for our panel? Richard, going once, going twice?
Could I just tell everybody one little thing while I'm sitting up here,
Please.
because I thought about it, and it ties to ROI. Currently, I sit on the Meetings and Exhibitions Section Council at ASAE. I'm the chair. And last year, they polled the section council, and then they polled the whole section about what was the most pressing issue to meetings and trade shows. And what came back unilaterally was the need to measure ROI. So what they did is they had the council sat down in October, and it's quite an amazing process, but it was a bunch of trade show people, meetings people, vendors from all the different parts of a community, like AV and decorators. Anyway, we sat down and created 2 tools, one from the eyes of the attendee to help them, and we're also going with that whole thing now of calling people meeting participants instead of attendees. But anyway, point being that if there's a tool now on the ASAE website, if you want to go to it, go to the Meetings and Expositions Section Council, and it's really a framework, nothing more than a framework for you to look at and say, okay, this is things I can do to measure attendee or participant ROI, and here's some things we can do to measure exhibitor, vendor ROI. My thought would be if they wanted it very simple, but my thought would be to make it into some form of attendee app that you could use to get the information to help the people measure that ROI. And I'm just talking about that because we've been talking about ROI, and I think that tool is really good. So go to ASAE and use it.
Any closing remarks from Bob or Jeff? Hunter, Bob, Jeff, thank you guys very much. Appreciate it.